Okay. I think for all the simplicity of the song Bahay Kubo, it just talks about different kinds of plants that are very common in our country. Stephen, Dr. Acabado has shown us how complicated that garden can be. That in that garden you see a meeting of cultures and influences. And it disabuses the Filipinos who always think that our country has been an isolated place. It's not isolated. So many influences come, so many influences pass through the islands, and because of that, it has generated this complex collection of vegetation, plants and fruits, etc. And when we sing Bahay Kubo, now after looking at the illustration created out of the stories done by Stephen, then you are looking at the Philippine world in a different way. I think much as anthropology is a often misunderstood discipline, culture has often also been a misunderstood concept. Now, when you talk about culture, and as an anthropologist, I always say cultures, we tend to think in terms of the beautiful things around us. But culture is more than that. Culture is about how we do things, where we learn how we do things. It tells us about the stories that are told around us. It teaches us how to behave in a particular setting. It gives us an identity. So it's a very complicated thing. But why anthropology? Because anthropologists have always focused on the definition of cultures. And the definitions themselves have evolved. And in the evolution, I'm not saying that you're getting more confused, but in the evolution of definition, sa pagbabago ng pagpapaliwanag tungkol sa kalinangan or kultura, you start to think of culture as something that is alive and vital, and nagbabago. And it's very important to think of kultura, kalinangan in that sense. Nagbabago, nagpapalit. In Ticao, I do not have a memory of Sarong Bangi because the songs we were listening to were Visayan songs, Cebuano songs, Waray songs that were being sung by my Lola. It was only when we moved to Naga that I began to hear and became familiar with the song Sarong Bangi. But even then, it was taught to us as a folk song. And in the house, we had a collection of vinyl records because we loved local songs. And I would always see, after the title Sarong Bangi on the placa, I would always see the term P period, D period, which meant public domain. It would only be in college that I would get to know the composer of Sarong Bangi, Potenciano Gregorio, who was from Libog and now Santo Domingo. And then I realized it's not a folk song. I remember, I think, when we were traveling, Christian, to Masbate, and we passed by the islands, the tip of Ticao. And first of all, we were coming from the mainland, and we passed by Bulan, Sorsogon. Then it did not have any significance yet. But when we passed by the Halia island, then it dawned to us that while maybe people are not practicing the rituals anymore related to these names, the fact that the places maintain these names would mean that they are always reminding us about the past of our culture, of our island. Halia, for example, is the ritual for the moon done by women, while Bulan would refer to the more male-ordained ritual. And when you're traveling from the Masbate mainland back, you're always hitting Bulan. And in many ways, it looks like the places themselves are cosmic directions. And it's embedded in our consciousness. And it all depends to the teachers, to the culture bearers, to remind us that these things exist and they are important to our identity. They make our lives very, very interesting and exciting and exotic. Folk astronomy, or people's notion of the sky, the heavens, the unknown, the directions, I think they are the missing links to who we are as a people now. When my brother died and I was composing a little poem for him, I remembered I was thinking, what is the name for the morning star? And in Tikao, it's called Kagbubuwas. And you can never translate it directly. So I had to translate it as the star for the day that is becoming. And while we think they are archaic, they are not. Because if you look at astronomy or science, they are all linked to a culture, the Greek culture. You know, the stars are named after mythical beings. And what's keeping us from maintaining our legends and myths and old tales and making these planetary objects, the stars, the thunder, the lightning, more accessible to us? I think folk astronomy is a way to native exegesis, or knowing how people define themselves in relation to the world, or make it bigger in relation to the universe around them. That's important. Nung maliit pa ako, hindi ako nagtatanong kung sinusundan ako ng buwan. Pero nagtatanong ako kung bakit ako sinusundan ng anino ko. And that bothered me a lot. Kasi gusto kong maalis siya. Kasi maitim siya, no? And wala siyang mukha. I wasn't scared. Pero parang wala akong control sa kanya. But when I look up and I look at, the moon or the stars, wala. Ang nakita ko lang parang ang layo niya, ang layo ng buwan, ang layo ng bituin, pero ang ganda nilang tingnan. Noong mga 1950s, sa paraang theoretical, sa pagtuturo, isang analysis ng mga aswang, engkanto, yung mga hindi nakikitang yung mga halimaw, para siyang means of social control. Kaya lang, depende sa paggamit nito. Maraming mga bayan ang natutuwa na meron silang ganung mga kwento. And para sa akin, mas may malalim na kahulugan ang mga hindi nakikitang mga nilalang, katulad ng engkanto. When people say, meron bang notion ng paggalang sa kalikasan ng mga Bicolano, mga Pilipino? Meron. Ito yung nakikita sa mga engkanto na nagbibigay sa inyo ng warning na huwag kayong maingay pag dumadaan kayo sa mga kagubatan. So if you look at it, parang simple lang na warning, but no, it's not. You're actually respecting nature. You're respecting the birds, the animals. At isa pa, hindi mo pwedeng putulin ang kahoy na basta-basta lang. Magpapaalam ka sa mga hindi nakikitang nilalang. So that's the idea, that there's a world that's guided by unseen beings. So hindi siya nakakatakot. We have to coexist with them. And I think ang nakialam sa distortion ng mga engkanto, mga ganyan, mga Western na mga pananaw o kaya mga pare na ginawa siyang parang kasama na ni Satanas. Hindi, kasi ang aswang hindi naman talaga ganun. In fact, you don't exorcise them. Kinakausap sila. Binibigyan sila ng offerings, no? You negotiate with them. And that speaks of a harmony in a Philippine cosmos, in a Philippine universe. And that's beautiful, I think. When I wrote the book Tales, The Last Sacristan Mayor and the Most Expensive Mass for the Dead, Tales from Ticao, it was meant actually as an ethnography, meaning a description of the culture on the island. Pero sa paraan, nagagamitin ko yung mga kwento ng mga hindi lang enchanting, mga kapanapanabik, no? O, to a certain point, mga mahiwagang kwento, no? Because I think the context of that was people in the island were very proud to describe the place as an enchanted island. So I think, bakit nila tinatawag na enchanted island? Because ang isla para sa kanila ay nabubuo ng maraming mga kwento ng mga tao. Some of them are stories about the devil, some of them are stories about the church, some of them are stories about dead people or people who are flying above the mountains, etc. And when I say ethnography of enchantment, because I want people to know na ang isang isla ay hindi lamang isang geography, population, square kilometers, anong distance, ano ang trade, ano ang kasaysayan, ano pagdating ng mga Kastila. It's more than that. Ito yung mga kwento na natatago pag hindi mo alam kung sino magkikwento. That's why it's very important that in this ethnographic exercise, makilala mo ang mga nagkikwento. Kaya sinabi ko nga doon sa libro na parang wala na akong narinig ng mga kwento because I don't know anymore who the narrators are. And the narrators are people in touch with their culture and who are aware and conscious of their identity bilang taga-Ticao. When you're approaching a society, may makikita ka kaagad na a simple way or on the surface, a narrative. Kung yun lang ang pagbabasihan mo to understand kung ano ang kultura na yan, kung anong lipunan na yan, you're missing out on the unsaid. At yung mga unsaid na to are embedded in kwento, mga folk tales, mga folk songs that are using figures of speech that are common to that place, metaphors, pero unique to that particular place. So it's really getting into the heart of the place. It's getting deeper into the place and the people. Ang alamat ng Pina sa unang tingin looks like a very, that's a pun sa unang tingin kasi mata, no? Looks like an absurd and very grotesque story about a child na walang pasensya na maghanap. Sa kahanap niya, sinumpa siya ng kanyang nanay, no? Na magkaroon ka sana ng maraming mata and eventually she becomes the pineapple. No? So it's if you're a writer, you're jumping from a human being to a fruit. Nakakatawa, nakatuwa. But at the same time, I think more than the idea of being a punishment for the child, I think it tells us about the value of obedience in a simple Filipino home. At makikita mo na dalawa ang bida, batang babae at ang nanay, no? So it tells us about our notion of mother, our notions of girls, na dapat ang mga babae sumusunod. Bakit hindi lalaki ang naging pinya? Because of gender inequality, pinababayaan lang mga batang lalaki na bahala ka. You're not even expected to help a lot in the household chores. No? So may nakatago sa kwento ng pinya, and that makes it a very interesting way to teach young children values of discipline, respecting the mother, and understanding the origins of some things. No? I think yung paggalang sa kultura, sa kalinangan, should begin at home, no? And reinforced in the elementary when they enter the school age. It matters a lot. For example, I come from a generation nang binabasa namin mga American books, mga Pilgrims, mga ganyan. Alam namin ang Plymouth Rock. Alam namin ang Thanksgiving. At nakikita namin ang mga snow. I think there's got to be a revamp in that area of education. Importante ang pagtuturo ng kultura na embedded sa kung ano talaga tayo, hindi yung nasa labas. Well, we have a very sophisticated term for that, decolonization. I think ang pagtuturo ng mga folktales is a way of decolonizing child rearing and instructing the child in a classroom setting. Nung maliit pa ako, lumaki ako sa aking lola, kapatid ng totoong lola, no? And I was the only baby in that house, the only boy, lahat matatanda na. And my father would always bring me to the farm. My grandfather would always bring me to the farm. And parang I grew up having birds as toys, no? And I remember them yellow, maliliit na ang tawag sa tikaw, pusiw, no? And we would always put them in a basket, usually mga dalawa. And in the morning, they would always be gone. Makikita ko na lang feathers kasi kinain ng pusa, no? So, but I would continue to have them, parang endless supply of birds, no? And so when I grew up, parang ayoko mag-alaga ng ibon. First of all, naawa ko sa kanila na because they're flying and you're keeping them cooped in a very small space in a cage, and not because I'm an ecologically conscious person, but maybe it's from my childhood. At ngayon nga, hindi mo na nakakita mga ibon, no? And I remember years back, I saw little kids walking around with nest, malaking pugad. And I was very bothered by that. Tinawag ko sila, saan galing yan? Because given the size of the nest, I know na malaking ibon ang gumagamit doon. So, that is me as a person. I always have a binocular. And I enjoy looking at the birds from afar. Maybe because I don't want to keep them. And because they're vanishing. If we just focus on it as a punishment or as a curse, ano pa rin siya? Pumapasok pa rin siya sa lengguwahe ng myth, ng mito, na is very creative, katulad ng mga punishment kina Prometheus, kina Pandora, na may twist. So para kay Pina, is not really having many eyes, although ang pinya nga maraming mata. Kundi the burden given to her by the mother was for her to have many ways of looking at things, that it can be such a burden, a problem for a girl to be seeing so many things. Yun ang pabigat sa kanya. So, figuratively, hindi naman talaga maraming mata. Binigyan lang sa Now you would be seeing more things na hindi mo na kayang, you cannot even process, no? I think it continues. Ang kwento ni Pina is resolved by the fruit. Pag kinakain ng pinya, tinatanggal ang mata. So it's not necessary. So ang punishment, ang curse ng nanay sa kanya is for her to have those things, pero tatanggalin mo rin. So paulit-ulit, parang ano nga, parang mga punishment ng Diyos na paulit-ulit, no? Cyclical. And myth is a cyclical way of telling a story. Never ending. For quite a long time, ang mga guro, when they are given a folktale, a myth, they would just narrate the story, no? And they would look for values. Pero through the years, katulad ng literary analysis, nakita ng mga tao na legends or myths can be processed through inversion, yung pagbabaliktad, no? Na ang sinasabi niya is the opposite of what is really happening in the world, no? O kaya it can be a subversion. Minsan naman, may mga kwentong mythological na ang hindi nangyayari sa totoong buhay, nangyayari sa mythical plane. So it's an aspiration. So it's a solution na ginagawa ng utak, no? Kunyari, the fact na mga mahihirap, nagiging reyna, nagiging hari, nagiging prinsesa, nagiging prinsipe, that gives hope, no? But at the same time, it can also articulate things that are not talked directly to young kids. The notion that the world is filled with inequality. Hindi yan sinasabi sa mga folktales. Pero makikita mo yan. So, folktales are very rich in version, subversion, distortion, clarification, articulation of the world.
Maraming salamat, Professor Tito Valiente. At para sa iba pang pagtalakay tungkol sa ating episode, kasama sina Dr. Steven Acabado at Dr. Alan Derain, bisitahin ang aming YouTube channel.